The Thralic Legion stood on the precipice of what they believed was another effortless conquest. Their ranks were an intimidating spectacle, sleek, advanced, and dripping with confidence. For centuries, they had maintained their supremacy across the galaxy, wielding weapons that could disintegrate matter and shields capable of absorbing any energy projectile known to exist. Today, their gaze had turned toward a small human colony on the far edge of the galaxy. A target so simple, so beneath them, they almost viewed the mission as an insult. The Thralic commander, General Zarn, sneered at the reports of Earth's military defenses. "Primitive," he said, dismissing the intelligence briefing in front of him. "Ballistic weapons. Ammunition. They still fire solid slugs, like ancient savages." His voice was thick with disdain, earning chuckles from the assembled officers. In the command chamber of the lead ship, the elite of the Thralic military stood around a massive holomap. Earth spun lazily in the middle, a small blue-green orb against the blackness of space. "Send in the first wave. Let's get this over with. I tire of these primitive distractions," Zarn ordered with a bored wave of his hand. Their mission was simple: land, intimidate, and force the humans to surrender. Their advanced energy weapons and shields would make this an easy task. The Thralic didn't consider the humans a threat. In fact, they barely considered them a species worth noting. The humans had barely left their planet, after all. Their technology was hundreds, if not thousands, of years behind the rest of the galaxy. The fleet descended through Earth's atmosphere, the hulking ships causing waves of panic as they passed over cities and landscapes, casting massive shadows on the ground below. Thousands of humans looked up in terror, but no one resisted, at least, not yet. Zarn's forces landed with military precision, forming tight ranks as their energy weapons hummed to life. Hovering drones spread out across the area, scanning for hostiles. To the Thralic, it was an exercise in superiority. The battlefield was already theirs. Then they saw the humans, a ragtag group of soldiers, standing defiantly in front of the colony. Zarn chuckled. He couldn't help it. "Look at them," he muttered to his second-in-command. "They're still using projectile weapons." The humans, to the Thralic's eyes, were unremarkable. They wore worn-out combat gear, their faces lined with tension but lacking the sheen of advanced technology. Among them was a man crouching beside a curious piece of equipment. Zarn zoomed in on the image, intrigued by the bulky contraption the soldier was assembling. "A machine gun?" one of his officers mused, incredulous. "No, not just any machine gun. It's some sort of primitive rotary cannon. The minigun, they called it." Zarn raised an eyebrow, genuinely amused. The Thralic had long since abandoned projectile weaponry, having perfected energy-based systems that were infinitely more efficient and destructive. The very idea of firing physical rounds was laughable to them. The Thralic forces began to move, their ranks spreading out as they prepared to make short work of this final, pointless resistance. Shields activated with an almost imperceptible hum, and their energy weapons were trained on the human soldiers. "Begin," Zarn ordered, his voice cold and detached. A volley of laser fire erupted from the alien ranks, bright beams of energy slicing through the air toward the humans. The humans braced themselves, taking cover behind makeshift barricades. Bullets from their rifles spat weakly at the Thralic shields, bouncing off like rain against the window. It was just as Zarn expected. The humans, with their outdated firearms, were no match for the advanced technology of the Thralic Legion. He could already taste the victory, the swiftness of the operation confirming his belief in the inherent weakness of humanity. And then it happened. Amidst the human ranks, a deep, mechanical whirring sound began to rise. It was low at first, barely noticeable over the din of battle. But it grew louder, more distinct. The soldier with the strange rotary cannon had finished assembling it, and now the barrels of the minigun began to spin. "What is that noise?" Zarn muttered, squinting at the holographic feed. Before he could process what was happening, the minigun roared to life. The sound was unlike anything the Thralic had ever heard, an angry, terrifying howl that cut through the battlefield like a storm. In an instant, a torrent of bullets erupted from the minigun, far more rounds than any other human weapon had fired before. The first Thralic soldiers to face the onslaught were caught off guard, expecting their energy shields to absorb the impact of this outdated technology. But the sheer volume of fire was staggering. Hundreds of rounds per second slammed into the Thralic front line, overwhelming their shields in a matter of moments. Zarn's eyes widened as he saw his soldiers stagger back. Their shields, designed to deflect energy blasts, were being torn apart by the unrelenting barrage of physical slugs. The soldiers themselves were next, armor crumpling under the weight of the bullets, their bodies sent flying as the minigun continued to pour destruction across the battlefield. "No, no, this isn't possible!" Zarn shouted, his hands gripping the console as he watched his troops fall like wheat before a scythe. The soldiers who had once stood proud and confident were now scrambling for cover, their ranks broken and in disarray. The minigun's barrels spun faster and faster, spitting an almost endless stream of bullets into the advancing Thralic forces. The humans, once outnumbered and outgunned, now had the upper hand. The alien elite, who had prided themselves on their technological superiority, were being ripped apart by sheer, brute force. Zarn's confidence began to falter, the surety of victory slipping from his grasp. His soldiers, once so composed, were now panicked, trying to retreat as the humans pressed their advantage. The general clenched his fists in frustration. How could these primitive humans, these space orcs, be so devastating? And all because of that cursed weapon. The Thralic Legion, confident in their superior technology, wasted no time unleashing a barrage of precision energy beams at the human soldiers. Their aim was flawless, cutting through the air with deadly efficiency. The humans, caught in the open, were hit hard. Soldiers fell as bright streaks of light sliced through the battlefield, their bodies crumpling under the impact. It was exactly as the Thralic expected, swift, decisive annihilation. For a moment, the battlefield seemed like a foregone conclusion. The human line was faltering, soldiers scrambling for cover as the Thralic advanced with disciplined precision. Their commander, General Zarn, smirked as he observed the carnage. "Pathetic," he muttered. "They can't even handle a frontal assault." But the humans weren't finished yet. In the chaos, a few survivors made their way to the strange, bulky contraption they had been guarding. A human soldier gritted his teeth, ignoring the carnage around him as he finished loading the rotary barrels. His hands moved with a practiced efficiency, the hum of the weapon growing louder. Then, with a resolute pull of the trigger, the minigun roared to life. The battlefield, once dominated by the sharp crackle of energy weapons, was now filled with the thunderous roar of thousands of bullets being unleashed in rapid succession. It was a terrifying, visceral sound, completely unlike anything the Thralic had ever encountered. The alien ranks, so used to absorbing energy blasts with ease, were suddenly caught off guard. Bullets tore through the air with frightening speed, ripping into the Thralic shields. At first, the soldiers were confident their defenses would hold, but within moments, the sheer volume of fire overwhelmed them. Shield generators sparked and sputtered, failing to cope with the relentless barrage. Zarn's expression shifted from smugness to confusion as he watched the front line buckle. "What's happening?" he demanded, his eyes darting across the battlefield feed. Soldiers who had stood proudly moments before were now scrambling, desperate to find cover. The kinetic force of the bullets punched through their armor, shredding flesh and bone with terrifying ease. "What is this?" one Thralic officer muttered, staring in disbelief as his comrades fell like leaves in a storm. The humans, meanwhile, were laughing. Amidst the chaos, they shouted to each other, exchanging banter as they ducked in and out of cover. One soldier, reloading his rifle, grinned and shouted over the roar of the minigun. "Looks like they don't like getting hit by real bullets." The alien forces, once disciplined and organized, were thrown into complete disarray. They had never faced an enemy that fought like this. Every battle they had ever fought followed a predictable pattern. Energy shields absorbed energy weapons, advanced tactics overwhelmed inferior species. But here, they were facing something raw and unrelenting. The minigun's continuous fire seemed to defy all logic. It didn't stop, it didn't falter. It just kept mowing them down. A group of Thralic soldiers attempted to regroup, their commander barking orders through the comms. But every effort to reorganize was met with another brutal sweep of the minigun's fire. One by one, their attempts to form a coherent defense were cut short. There was no room for strategy, no time to think. The humans were relentless, pushing forward with reckless abandon. Zarn watched in horror as his forces crumbled. He could see the panic spreading through the ranks, soldiers abandoning their positions, throwing down their weapons, retreating. "Hold your ground!" he shouted over the comms, but his voice was drowned out by the chaos unfolding below. A squadron of Thralic tried to flank the humans, hoping to catch them from the side where the minigun's fire couldn't reach. But as they moved into position, a grenade arced through the air and landed right in their midst. The explosion sent alien bodies flying, the blast deafening. More laughter from the humans. "Nice throw!" one soldier yelled, slapping his comrade on the back. "They're supposed to be an elite force?" Another mocked, firing off another burst from his rifle. "I've seen school kids put up a better fight." The Thralic couldn't comprehend the humans' behavior. To them, combat was a cold, calculated exercise in efficiency. But these humans? They fought with wild, chaotic energy. There was no discipline in their movements, no adherence to standard tactics. And yet they were winning. General Zarn's confidence began to waver. His soldiers, once the pride of the Thralic Legion, were being torn apart by a weapon that, in his mind, shouldn't even exist. How could something so primitive be so effective? "Sir, we're losing too many," an officer shouted, his voice shaking with fear. "We need reinforcements now." Zarn clenched his fists. He couldn't believe it had come to this. "Very well," he growled. "Deploy the mechs." From the rear of the Thralic formation, massive, heavily armored figures began to emerge. The mechs were towering, mechanized behemoths, designed specifically to withstand any form of energy attack. Their shields were reinforced, their armor impenetrable by any known weaponry. Zarn watched as the mechs marched forward, their massive feet shaking the ground beneath them. "Let's see how these savages handle real firepower," he muttered, confidence creeping back into his voice. The human soldiers noticed the mechs immediately. Their taunts quieted, replaced by grim determination. The minigun continued to fire, but the bullets that had torn through the Thralic infantry now bounced harmlessly off the thick armor of the approaching machines. "All right, boys," one of the human soldiers muttered, reloading his rifle. "Looks like they brought out the big guns." The Thralic mechs pressed forward, their heavy energy cannons charging up, ready to unleash a devastating volley. The tide of the battle was about to shift once more. But the humans were far from done. The towering Thralic mechs advanced across the battlefield, their massive, mechanized frames casting long shadows over the chaos. Each step reverberated through the ground, the earth trembling beneath their weight. Equipped with advanced shielding technology, they were designed to withstand anything thrown at them. Heavy artillery bristled from their limbs, and their reinforced armor gleamed under the hazy sun. To the Thralic commander, these machines were the ultimate weapon, invincible, unstoppable. From his command platform, General Zarn surveyed the battlefield with a satisfied grin. This battle had dragged on longer than expected, but now it was time to end it. The human resistance had been more troublesome than anticipated, but their primitive weapons would be useless against the mechs. "Crush them," he ordered, his voice cold and final. "Leave nothing standing." The human soldiers, scattered across what was left of their defensive line, stared at the approaching machines in horror. Any trace of victory they'd felt after decimating the Thralic infantry evaporated the moment the mechs entered the fray. These were not soldiers. These were walking fortresses, armed to the teeth and impervious to the bullets that had torn through their alien counterparts. The minigun, still smoking from its earlier assault, fell silent as the operator looked helplessly at the advancing behemoths. The mech's energy shields absorbed every round with ease, barely flickering under the onslaught. The humans had seen Thralic shields before, but nothing like this. The mech's defenses seemed impenetrable, deflecting every bullet as if it were nothing more than a gentle breeze. "Shit!" one of the soldiers muttered under his breath, wiping sweat from his brow. What the hell are we supposed to do against those things? The air was thick with tension. The mechs were getting closer, their heavy cannons primed and ready to obliterate anything in their path. Concrete barriers and metal fortifications were reduced to rubble with a single shot. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado fading fast. They had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. The overwhelming firepower and sheer size of the mechs made it clear that they were outmatched. But retreat wasn't an option. They couldn't run. They wouldn't. Not here, not now. Among the remaining troops, one soldier, a grim-faced veteran with more scars than he cared to count, stared at the mechs with a calculating gaze. His mind raced, searching for any solution, no matter how desperate. He had survived worse, he reminded himself. But looking at the hulking machines, even he couldn't deny the odds were stacked higher than ever before. A sudden idea hit him like a bolt of lightning. They needed more firepower, something bigger, stronger, and fast. The minigun had worked before, but against these things, they needed something even more powerful. With a sense of urgency, he called out to his fellow soldiers. "Get the exosuit," he barked, "and strap the big gun to it. We're not done yet." The others looked at him in disbelief. The exosuit, a bulky, experimental piece of human tech, was more of a last resort than a reliable weapon. It wasn't even fully tested, and the oversized version of the minigun they jerry-rigged to it was as likely to tear the suit apart as it was to take down an enemy. But they had no other choice. They had to try. In a flurry of movement, the team scrambled to assemble the exosuit. The clanking of metal and the hum of machinery filled the air as they worked frantically to prepare the weapon. The minigun, now even larger than before, was mounted onto the exosuit's frame. The soldier who had called for the plan, grim-faced and resolute, strapped himself in. The exosuit groaned under the weight of the weapon, but it held. His hands tightened around the controls. "All right," he muttered to himself, steadying his breath. "Let's see if this thing can punch through." With a roar, the exosuit-powered minigun came to life. The ground shook as the first volley of bullets tore through the air, the sheer force of the firepower causing the suit to vibrate violently. Hundreds of rounds per second hurtled toward the mechs, crashing into their shields with unrelenting fury. But the mechs kept coming. Their shields, glowing with a faint blue light, held firm. The human soldiers watched in growing despair as the bullets failed to penetrate, bouncing off the energy barriers like pebbles against a wall. It was like firing a machine gun into a hurricane, hoping for something to give. The mech's artillery began to retaliate. Explosions rocked the battlefield as heavy energy blasts rained down on the humans' position. One by one, their makeshift defenses were obliterated. The soldier in the exosuit gritted his teeth, refusing to back down. He adjusted the aim, spraying bullets at every inch of the mech's shielding, searching for any sign of weakness. Sweat dripped down his face as the minigun roared in his ears. The sheer power of the weapon was immense, almost too much for the suit to handle. But he kept firing. "They're not stopping!" another soldier shouted, ducking behind the remnants of a wall as an energy blast slammed into the ground nearby. "We can't hold them!" For a brief moment, the soldier in the exosuit thought they might finally be outmatched. The mechs continued their relentless march, their shields refusing to break. It seemed like nothing could stop them. But then, something shifted. A faint flicker. Barely noticeable, but enough. One of the mech's shields, after absorbing round after round, began to waver. The bullets, once deflected harmlessly, now struck closer to the core of the energy field. The soldier in the exosuit saw it, a tiny, almost imperceptible gap in the shield's integrity. Come on, he muttered, his hands tightening on the controls. He adjusted his aim, focusing all his firepower on the flickering spot. The minigun roared even louder, the barrels glowing red-hot as they spat out a continuous stream of bullets. The shield flickered again, this time more noticeably. And then, with a sudden, violent burst of energy, it collapsed. The soldier didn't waste a second. As the mech shield dropped, the bullets tore into its armor, ripping through metal and circuitry. Sparks flew, and the massive machine let out a mechanical groan before collapsing to the ground in a heap of twisted metal. One down. But more were coming. The ground shook as the remaining mechs pushed forward, their towering frames casting shadows over the battlefield. But something had changed. The once impenetrable shields, which had deflected everything thrown at them, were beginning to show cracks. The relentless barrage from the exosuit-powered minigun was taking its toll. The soldier inside the exosuit tightened his grip on the controls. He could feel the shift, sense the weakness in the mech's defenses. Bullet after bullet slammed into the shields, each round wearing them down further. Sparks flew, the hum of the energy barriers becoming unstable as the pressure mounted. One of the mechs, the largest of the group, stumbled. Its shield flickered, then shattered with a sharp burst of light. Without the barrier, the minigun's rounds tore into its metal hull, shredding through armor plating and exposing the delicate circuitry within. The mech groaned, its towering form collapsing into a twisted heap of metal and fire. Cheers erupted from the human soldiers. The tide was turning. The once seemingly invincible machines were falling, one after another. The minigun, a simple but brutally effective weapon, was proving more powerful than even the Thralok's most advanced technology. As the second mech shield failed, the human soldiers watched with a mix of disbelief and exhilaration. This was no longer a desperate stand, it was a slaughter. Each mech that lost its shield was quickly torn apart, their towering forms crashing to the ground in smoldering heaps. The battlefield, once dominated by the imposing presence of the Thralok war machines, was now littered with the wreckage of their defeat. On the other side of the battlefield, the Thralok commander watched in horror. His once proud legion, his mighty machines of war, were falling to a group of humans armed with what he had once considered primitive weapons. The minigun, a crude ballistic weapon by Thralok standards, was wreaking havoc on the most advanced technology the Empire had ever fielded. This can't be happening," the commander muttered, his confidence shattered. The Thralok had come to Earth expecting a swift victory, a show of force that would crush humanity beneath their boots. But now, the tables had turned. The humans, with their chaotic tactics and brute force, were tearing through his army like a storm. Despair spread through the ranks of the Thralok soldiers. They had always been taught that their technology, their discipline, made them superior to every other species in the galaxy. But here, on this backwater human colony, they were being proven wrong in the most brutal way possible. The mighty Thralok war machines, the pinnacle of their military prowess, were crumbling under the weight of human firepower. Back on the front line, the humans pressed their advantage. With each mech that fell, their confidence grew. The banter between the soldiers became louder, their laughter more frequent. They had faced impossible odds and come out on top. Now, it was time to finish the job. "Keep pushing!" one of the soldiers shouted, his voice filled with a newfound sense of triumph. "They're falling apart!" The minigun operator grinned inside his exosuit. His arms ached from the strain, the weight of the massive weapon taking its toll, but he kept firing. There was something primal, something exhilarating about the sheer power he wielded. Each squeeze of the trigger sent hundreds of rounds downrange, and with each volley, another mech shield fell. The Thralok, once an unstoppable force, were now in full retreat. Their lines broke, and panic spread like wildfire. Soldiers who had marched onto the battlefield with confidence and pride now scrambled for cover, their carefully drilled formations falling apart. They had never faced an enemy like this before, an enemy that fought with reckless abandon, with firepower and tactics that defied all their expectations. From his command platform, the Thralok commander clenched his fists. He had no choice. The battle was lost. "Order the retreat!" he barked, his voice trembling with rage. "Get everyone off this planet. Now!" The Thralok soldiers didn't need to be told twice. Ships that had once landed with an air of superiority now began to lift off in a desperate bid to escape. The once proud alien warriors, who had mocked the humans' outdated technology, were now fleeing for their lives, terrified of the minigun and the chaos it represented. On the ground, the human soldiers watched as the Thralok ships began to retreat. Victory was theirs. The minigun had turned the tide, proving that sometimes brute force was all it took to win a battle. Cheers erupted, soldiers clapping each other on the back as the last of the mechs crumbled. "Hell of a job," one soldier said with a grin, wiping sweat from his brow. "Who knew all it took to beat these bastards was an old-fashioned spray of bullets?" The celebration was short-lived. Just as the last Thralic ship disappeared into the sky, the radio crackled to life. The commander's voice came through, tense and urgent. "Don't get comfortable," he said, his tone cutting through the momentary relief. "We've just picked up a new signal. A much larger Thralic fleet is on its way. And they're not coming to talk." The soldiers' faces hardened. The battle was far from over. What they had faced so far was just a taste of the Thralic's true power. The real fight was still ahead. They had won this round, but the war was just beginning. The battlefield was littered with smoking wreckage and debris, the aftermath of a battle that had seemed impossible to win. Human soldiers stood among the remains, some leaning against their rifles, others sitting on the ground, too tired to care about the dirt and grime beneath them. Their victory had been absolute, yet the absurdity of it hung in the air like the lingering smoke from the fallen mechs. One of the soldiers, still strapped into the exosuit that had powered the oversized minigun, removed his helmet, wiping sweat and dirt from his brow. He looked at the massive weapon in his hands with a mixture of disbelief and awe. "I can't believe this thing worked," he muttered, half to himself, half to anyone nearby. Another soldier, limping slightly, came over and clapped him on the back. "Worked? It didn't just work, it turned those mechs into scrap metal. Who would have thought a bunch of bullets would bring down shields like that?" They exchanged tired grins. Despite the overwhelming odds, despite the Thralic's superior technology, the humans had pulled off a victory through sheer grit and the overwhelming power of an archaic weapon. The minigun, a relic in the eyes of the Thralic, had become the symbol of their triumph. As the soldiers regrouped, sharing exhausted banter and patching up their wounds, the word of their victory was already spreading beyond Earth. The Thralic survivors had fled with stories of terror, recounting how their invincible war machines had been torn apart by a race they had dismissed as primitive. The tales spread like wildfire, jumping from system to system, with each retelling more embellished than the last. Across the galaxy, the name, human, began to invoke a new sense of fear. What was once seen as a backward species, barely worth noticing, was now the stuff of legends. The Thralic had learned the hard way that humans didn't fight by the rules of advanced civilizations. They didn't rely on precision strikes or high-tech energy weapons. They fought with brute force, chaotic tactics, and weapons that seemed designed purely for destruction. The minigun, with its relentless barrage of bullets, became infamous in alien circles. It was more than just a weapon, it was a symbol of humanity's unpredictability, their refusal to follow the established norms of warfare. The Thralic, and many other alien races, began to whisper about humans as if they were the monsters hiding under the bed. Some even started calling them space orcs, a term that spread as quickly as the stories of their victory. To the aliens, humans were the embodiment of chaos. They didn't rely on sophisticated technology, didn't follow the rules of intergalactic combat. Instead, they showed up with weapons like the minigun, raw, brutal instruments of destruction that shredded the carefully crafted defenses of even the most advanced civilizations. In the halls of the Galactic Council, the whispers grew louder. Strategists and military leaders across countless star systems pondered how to deal with this new threat. If humanity could bring down Thralic war mechs with little more than a glorified rotary gun, what else were they capable of? Fear began to spread, not just of the weapons humans wielded, but of the unpredictability that seemed to define them. How could you prepare for an enemy who ignored every rule of warfare? Back on the battlefield, the human soldiers laughed as they patched up their wounded and recounted the battle. One of them walked over to the minigun, now resting silent on the ground, and gave it a playful pat. "You know," he said with a smirk, "all this high-tech alien gear, and it was good oil lead that won the day." Another soldier chuckled, lighting a cigarette as he sat down next to the fallen gun. "Who needs laser rifles and plasma cannons when you've got something like this?" The rest of the group shared a round of weary, knowing laughter. They had faced death and come out on top, not through the use of superior technology, but by sticking to what they knew best: brute force, chaos, and raw determination. It was a uniquely human approach to war, and it had turned the Thralok's carefully orchestrated invasion into a humiliating rout. As they prepared to leave the battlefield, one of the soldiers glanced toward the sky where the last of the Thralok ships had fled. "You think they'll come back?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. The Thralok would return, and next time they would come prepared. "Doesn't matter if they do," another soldier replied. "We'll be ready. And if they think a bigger fleet's gonna save them, well, let them try." They stood, gathering their gear and helping the wounded to their feet. The battlefield was quiet now, the once imposing war machines reduced to scrap. As they began their march back to base, the realization set in. This victory wasn't just about this battle. It was the beginning of something bigger. They knew the galaxy was watching now. They could feel it, the weight of a reputation that had just been born. The stories of humans, of their chaotic fighting style, and their devastatingly simple yet effective weapons, were spreading. Fear would follow those stories, a fear that would reach every corner of the galaxy. "Space orcs," one soldier muttered under his breath with a grin. "I kinda like that." The others laughed again, walking off the battlefield with the knowledge that today's victory was only the beginning. Humanity had made its mark, and their legend, the legend of the minigun, was just getting started.